You're listening to the Scaling Culture Podcast, where we sit down with thought leaders who share their experiences building incredible workplace cultures. This is our first episode back after a summer break, during which our host, Ron, and his wife welcomed their third child to the world, little Margot. Our guest today is Michael Canic, President and Chief Flagbearer of Making Strategy Happen, a consulting firm that helps committed leaders of mid-market companies turn ambition into strategy and strategy into reality. His recent book, Ruthless Consistency, reached the top of 2 bestseller lists and was selected by the Enterprisers Project as one of 10 leadership books to stretch your skills in 2021. Furthermore, this summer, Michael's book became available on Audible. Michael has delivered over 600 presentations on strategy and execution to audiences on 4 continents and is a former national championship-winning college football coach who has a Ph.D. in the psychology of human performance. In this episode of Scaling Culture, Ron and Michael discussed how best sports teams have lots in common with high-performing organizations with great culture, how to create an environment where everyone is focused, committed, and engaged with the overall mission, purpose, and goals, why strategic initiatives fail, and how to use constructive accountability to drive the right decision and actions.
Welcome to another episode of the Scaling Culture Podcast. I'm your host, Ron Lovett, and today I'm very excited to have Michael Canic with us. Michael, welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thanks.
It's funny. I was excited when you said, look, I'm in Vancouver today because I feel like it's been a long time since I've had a fellow Canadian on this show or even somebody who's in Canada. So I'm very excited. Today's good. This is good energy for me for Friday.
Well, good to be with you. And when I found out you were from Halifax is one of my favorite places in Canada.
Yeah, it is a beautiful place, right?
Yeah.
I love it. Well, so look, Michael, as president and chief flag-bearer of Making Strategy Happen, I was curious. Tell me more. Let's talk about what is Making Strategy Happen, and I do want you to circle back to chief flag-bearer. I've never heard that, and I'd like you to unpack it for me.
Sure. Well, at Making Strategy Happen, we work with committed leaders, emphasis on the committed, to turn ambition into strategy and strategy into reality. And we've all been through the strategic planning charade. We get everybody together, we get all amped up, we develop a plan, and then the plan, goes downhill and we get back to work. So I decided, that doesn't make a lot of sense. We've got to make strategy, come to life. So our focus is really helping strategy, turned into reality. That's what we've done with companies over the past almost 20 years now. Chief Flag Bearer simply means that this really is something I want to communicate to people. This is what I give, speeches on. It's what I've written about, everything to do with how do we turn strategy into reality and not just develop those strategic plans that sit on a shelf.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's interesting. And before we get into some topics, can you tell us how do you, because I found this interesting, you said those who are committed. Mm-hmm. How do you figure out if someone's committed? What's the line in the sand? How do you know if I'm committed or not to this?
I'll ask them about their past experience. What have they done? What has worked? What hasn't worked? Why? What have you done differently? What do you do to improve yourself? How do you make sure you're not repeating the mistakes of the past? So I like to shine a spotlight on these, leaders and CEOs and business owners. And because at the end of the day, it comes down to them. What they do drives everything. And I like to emphasize it's your commitment as a leader that really sets the tone for the organization. So we're going to put a spotlight on you and make sure that your practices and everything you say and do is aligned with what you're trying to create.
But what if their past doesn't show the commitment that they now are committed to because of an aha moment that they had? How do you know that they're committed to the future without really knowing? Because that's got to be the case. Sometimes, look, I've not been a servant leader. I've not really been committed, but nothing's worked. It's time for me to commit. Or does that answer the question?
Well, is there a triggering event, as you said, something that triggers a fundamental change? But if not, if I'm not convinced, frankly, I won't work with them. I'll say, you may not be ready for this. Maybe you need to just get someone to help you develop a plan and see what happens. But, I really need to see that sense of commitment either in their background or, as you pointed out, if they have a triggering event, something to say, I'm sick and tired of these plans that sit on shelves, of change initiatives that flounder. I'm not going to put up with it anymore. So if they're at that point of pain, where they're just tired of what's been done in the past and they're done, then I get a sense, okay, now you're ready to change.
Interesting. And, obviously you've got, a few different things, execution strategy, but culture is a big part of what you are advising on.
Yes.
What was your aha moment, Michael? Why did you bring culture into that? Because sometimes that doesn't fit with, with coaches or companies that provide strategic direction and leadership stuff. It sometimes is missing culture. Why culture? What was your aha moment to bring that in?
Well, two things really came together to help that. One was at university, I played football and then coached football and really got a sense of that team environment. And I remember one year playing on, our team, we did not have a good culture. We didn't call it culture at the time, but you could just tell there wasn't alignment. People weren't really, working together. It was very individualistic, and the team underperformed as a result. Another season, we had a team that the coaches had really, emphasized team. We had come together very well. There was trust, there was focus, there was shared, goals and values. And it became clear that was really a key to success. The other thing that drove my appreciation of culture was my academic studies. My doctorate is in the psychology of human performance. What are the factors that affect performance? How well people perform. And you get a sense in any group or organization environment, it's critical that all the things that impact people point them in the same direction and align with the other people in the organization. So, fortunately, early on, I got a strong sense that, culture, even though we didn't call it culture at the time, really does count.
And so let's stay on sports for a sec. You have some experience that you draw in your practice today from coaching sports teams. What are those particular things that you're drawing that you're bringing forward that really align and make sense? Because I love going back to sports teams. I think, there was a speaker, Jack Daly, one time said, junior high sports teams, high performing ones, outperform from a performance standpoint, have better strategies, initiatives, et cetera, than half of the corporations in North America.
Right. So the number one thing is focus. Teams, sports teams have a clear focus. What are we trying to accomplish? And in business, we often, dilute that by saying, well, work on this, do that. We don't give people a strong sense of what is the overarching focus. What are we trying to accomplish? What are the goals? What is expected of you as an individual? So in sports, we connect the dots very well. I know how what I do as a player impacts our team and how that impacts the result. In business, we don't do that as often. So one of the things I always emphasize with leaders is you've got to connect the dots. What is that overarching purpose? What are the goals we're trying to achieve? And what do we expect of each person as an individual? So once we have that focus, then what is it we need to do in terms of commitment? And, everybody says they're committed, but the reality is, Ron, people are, we've got a lot of different competing interests and things pulling at us. So there's a notion of sacrifice. Are you willing to do what it takes to win? Coaches like to say there's a big difference between the will to win and the will to do what it takes to win. So as players, are we willing to do what it takes, which is the things where maybe we don't like to do, or we don't want to do, or we're uncomfortable doing, but are we willing to do those in service of what we're trying to achieve? So, there's commitment, there's focus. Those are a couple of the big things that I find really roll over from the sports, environment to a business or work environment.
Yeah, interesting. And so when you think of, and you talked about this from a sports context, but creating an environment which is aligned, trying to create business with the mission, goals, et cetera.
Right.
At a high level, what do we do that? And I assume that some of this comes back to your book, Ruthless Consistency, and being consistent with the message, but maybe I'm wrong.
Right, exactly right. And there are 5 things we need to do to create that right environment. And by right environment, what I mean, Ron, is a culture of engagement and performance, because we have to have both engagement and performance. So to create that environment, 5 things. Number 1, we have to align people. Next, we have to equip them. We have to make sure we're coaching them, not just managing them. We're supporting them and we're valuing them. And maybe I can take a minute just on each one. But when I say align, I come back to when I mentioned purpose, goals, and expectations. Are they very clear on what is the big picture? How does what I do connect to that big picture? So we have to get them aligned that way. We have to make sure the incentives we're setting up, the psychological incentives, are aligned with it. And the big one we always overlook is we don't remove the disincentives that keep good people from changing. The mixed messages.
You're talking about the carrot versus the stick, essentially.
Psychologically, though, so I'm not talking about, carrot stick as in, kind of money punishment, but psychologically. So, as an example, why is it people don't like change? Is it because they're bad people or resistant? Typically, the number one reason is fear,
Right.
Fear of the unknown, right? That's a natural disincentive to change. So, if we want to get people aligned for change, we have to remove that disincentive. How do you remove the disincentive of the fear of the unknown? You have
Trust.
to over communicate. Yeah.
Okay.
Trust
Right.
and over communicate during times of change. So, if we have to get people aligned. So that means that, connecting the dots, removing those disincentives, tapping into the psychological incentives, such as, can they feel good about what they're achieving? Do they feel they have the autonomy, the purpose?
And sorry, Michael, and maybe I missed this, but part of that alignment is getting that messaging down. What is the company purpose? What is the mission? You really need those foundational messaging, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Otherwise, Ron, there's nothing to align with.
Right. Got it.
It starts with that core messaging. Exactly right. So we have to get that core in place. What are we trying to accomplish? What is our purpose? Then what do we expect of you as an individual? So, aligning is first. Second part of the model I talk about in the book is equipping people, equipping them to succeed, not setting them up to fail. And too often we don't provide people with sufficient knowledge, skills, resources, and authority, right? It's not that more is better, but we have to provide them with sufficient knowledge, skills, resources, and authority, because it's very frustrating to people when they want to do a good job, but they don't feel like you've given them the tools to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that I was thinking about when you said that is, what's the balance between, we are trying to crush this industry. We're trying to build this unicorn company, and we're, trying to change an industry, high expectations, but let's not set people up for failure, but let's push the envelope. How are you coaching leaders to find balance there?
Right. So I find more leaders will under-resource people than over-resource them. So first of all, that's the natural tendency. And the question is, again, do they have sufficient? So to find the balance, don't think you have to throw money at problems. Don't think you just have to throw resources at problems. Often that won't do it. But the question is, what is the minimum necessary we need in terms
to achieve that goal?
To achieve. And I like to use those terms. What's the minimum necessary? Don't throw necessarily more than the minimum, because then you're wasting resources. But if you don't provide people with what's necessary, then they're going to feel frustrated. So what's the minimum necessary?
I want to make sure I'm following this. I think I get that, but does that still play out for a goal? So, okay, I'm the sales manager and I have a goal for, maybe I need tools to achieve it, find some CRM, but the goal is $1 million in revenue for the quarter. And so, Ron, go for it, versus how do you balance that, these big goals, big project goals with timelines on them, like using that SMART acronym, and unpacking the attainable part. Because I've certainly been guilty of that, pushing the team, and then we're 3 quarters out, and I've just maybe pushed too hard in the past, and the goals were so lofty that there is this, man, you could never make it. Any strategies around balance?
There's a question I love to ask leaders to find that, and the question is: ask your people, why will this fail? Why will this fail? It's a counterintuitive question. It gets their attention, but they know the history, they know the culture, they know why things have succeeded and failed. Be honest. Tell us why you think it will fail. And then as a leader, you get to evaluate, is this something legitimate? Is this something we need to address up front? If everybody's saying, well, we've never had enough information on the new product, we're never given enough information, to sell, or maybe it's we don't have the back end support, whatever it is, by asking people, why will this fail, makes it, acceptable for them to tell you what they need. And then you get to decide as a leader.
Well, that seems to tie in directly to change management and why initiatives may fail by not asking that question, right? It gives a leader, I love that question. And it must help keeping initiatives or big goals alive.
Exactly, because we're often focused on here's what we need to make it work, and we often overlook here's the things that will cause to fail. You've got to play offense and defense, to go back to the sports analogy, you talked about. And it's one thing to say, yeah, we're going to score, we've got to, we're going to do this, but are we playing defense as well? Are we preventing failure as much as we're working to create success?
I like that, because I think what we've done in the past is asked a softer version of that question in our companies. And that has been, Well, Michael, great. Here's the goal. We agree to that. But what do you see as some of the roadblocks? That's not as powerful as how would this fail? I like that. You've really kind of brought that to the next level.
It gets people's attention.
Yeah. And it pushes them to say, how could this really fail? Like that, not just, well, this one conversation with Tony's going to be a roadblock. No, how does this fail? I like that.
Yeah. And then when people come up with those things, you have to reinforce them, thank them for bringing up what might be a little controversial, right? So it makes it safe for them to tell you their honest views, why they think it will fail. It doesn't mean you have to agree with them all the time, but it means you're respecting their input and their opinion.
No, that's right. So we're in a session and you bring up a why it will fail. And what I'm going to play this back. The wrong thing is, Michael, like, what are you crazy? That there's no way that's going to happen versus, look, thank you so much. I appreciate the feedback. We need to be thinking about things like that. Thanks for having the courage to bring that up.
Exactly right. Because otherwise,
did I get a gold star there? How did I do?
That is a gold star, Ron. Absolutely. Because if you don't do that, then, and if you put down the person who brings up the why it will fail, do you think anybody else is going to speak up? No way. Right. So you've killed it. Right. So you've got to create a safe environment to speak what might be uncomfortable or what you might not agree with, but you're much better getting that information on the table than having them go off to the break room after and going, that'll never happen. Because that's what people do. They often don't tell you to your face, but they go off to the break room and tell their buddies, oh, boy, that won't work. So that's not what you want.
No, but that brings me to another topic because there's going to be speed bumps. There's going to be bumps in the road. And I know you talk about constructive accountability, right? And so let's talk about that because we don't want someone, doing what you just talked about.
That's right. Well, accountability is one of those things most organizations struggle with. And, they'll say, hey, here's what we're going to do. And they invest in resources and technology and this and that. But the reality is, Ron, the moment they don't hold people accountable is the moment they send the message, this is optional. Right. Do it if you feel like it. Don't do it if you don't. So,
I will also say that's when high performance goes out the window, right?
Absolutely. Because the real reason you have to hold people accountable isn't for those few people. It's because it demotivates everyone else. That's the real cost. So why don't we do it? Because it's uncomfortable. It's confrontation. So I think we need to change our mindset around accountability. And what I like to call it is constructive accountability, because the purpose isn't to berate people. It's not to belittle them. The purpose of holding people accountable is to help them improve,
succeed,
get better, succeed, achieve. Absolutely. So think of it as constructive accountability. So we need to change our mindsets, and you have to go into this as a coach, not a manager. And I know you've talked about this too. You're a coach, not a boss. Well, similarly, as a coach, you need to take responsibility for the performance of their people, of your people. Coaches ask, what do I need to do to help each person, improve? So with constructive accountability, I want to make sure we're approaching people in a constructive way. We're saying, here's the common goal. Let's confront reality in a very objective way. How can I support you? Right? It's important to ask that. How can I help you succeed? What do you need from me? How can I support you?
Sorry, Mike, I want to just jump in for a sec because I find this interesting because I was trying to think about which of these questions are inside and which are outside. So for instance, I certainly ask a lot, hey, Michael, how do I help you through this? Right. But inside, I feel like saying, hey, if my job, how can I help Michael do that? Like that I'm going to have a different answer than you, right? Are you suggesting that you should be asking yourself this question and potentially the person who might have a different perspective?
Absolutely, both, because what you think is they need may not be what they say they need, right?
Correct.
You want to get their input. You've got your own ideas. Then again, you get to decide. But more importantly, it sends a message to them that you're not just out to get them, or you're not trying to get rid of me, that you really are concerned about them being successful. So it's the message you're sending in doing that. It doesn't mean you have to agree with everything they ask for, but at least says, how can I help you? What do you need to succeed? Let's talk about this. And then if you can demonstrate support, they're more likely to be confident, to feel confident in improving.
I was talking about this. I was doing a webinar for a coaching group yesterday, and I talked about a strategy that I use on tough conversations, learned from a coach of mine, Mara Benzudi. I don't know. Can't pronounce. Mara, I'm sorry. Your last name's very challenging for someone who's dyslexic. And so she had taught me this, and it really changed how I had these tough conversations. The opener. So for instance, we're back, we're role playing a little bit here. Yeah. So Michael, you're the salesperson, but my opening was, would always be kind of, look, how can I help you? I'd kind of start that way. But after some coaching from her, I started to open with the intention and making sure that the intention brought you in closer to me and that the intention was for you. So for instance, fast track that to today, fast forward. Hi, Michael. My intention of this conversation is to make you the best salesperson you can be, better than I ever was, and to coach you to be the best. And that is kind of one up some of my conversations and built trust right away. What do you think of that strategy?
I think it's very good. And why is because it creates two reasons. It creates a future focus. Right. As opposed to let's talk about your performance, which is a past focus. And it's like, oh, what is this going to be? So it's focused on the future and it's
right.
Positive. It's positive. So again, we're forward looking. We have good intentions. We expect good outcomes and results. So I think anything that sets that tone is very good. It's future oriented. It's positive oriented. Then the conversation is, okay, how do we get there? And then past performance is simply the context, the starting point, the baseline for what we need to achieve.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so, what are you seeing as the biggest culture challenge today with some of your customers? What is the thing that you just keep seeing, the problem you have to keep solving? What's that core issue in some cases, Michael, generally?
Well, inconsistency, mixed messages, right? We say something's important. We give people a clear direction, but we don't give them the tools to execute it. Or we give them lots of skills, but we don't give them the authority to apply the skills. We say, we're really committed to these values, but we don't hold the top performer accountable when they don't live up to the values. So it's that inconsistency. It's the mixed messages we send. That
side conversations, right?
Exactly, right? And that's what erodes culture. That's what erodes trust. And that's what erodes performance ultimately. So that's why I call the book Ruthless Consistency. And that doesn't mean robotic repetition of everything, Ron. What it means is this unwavering commitment, this alignment of intentions, decisions, and actions. We're continuously, relentlessly aligning intentions, decisions, and actions. Everything is pointed towards the same goal.
I like that. And I feel like we're aligned, ruthless consistency. That's why I used in my first book, outrageous empowerment.
Yes.
Yeah, I love that. That's great. That makes perfect sense. And that, even those skills as leaders and entrepreneurs and like myself, we are shiny object syndrome. It's hard for us to stay focused. I feel like just the action of that, there's this other, thing, there's that other impact that you might not see when you do that, which is just the art of being a little more disciplined and staying focused, which we all need help with.
Right. And here's a key point that I emphasize often with leaders. It's not the non-priorities that kill you, that take away your focus. It's the almost top priorities, the things that are almost at the top of the list that, take away your attention from those other things. Let me give you an example. A famous story of Warren Buffett, whose pilot came to him one time for career advice, right? Career. Buffett says, well, 3 steps. Number 1, write down your top 20 career goals. So he writes them down. He says, step number 2, circle the top 5. So he circles the top 5. And he said, the key to success is step number 3. The ones that you didn't circle become the avoid at all costs list. Right? The ones you didn't circle become the avoid at all costs list because they cannot be siphoning energy and attention from the 5 you decided were the most important. So again, it's the almost top priorities that kill us. So with leaders, you talked about the shiny objects, and that's what we have to instill in them. And that's why I said committed leaders, those who have the commitment reflected in the discipline to focus, align, and execute.
It's interesting you say that. I think that's spot on. I don't know where I read that or heard that, but I heard that story. That's a very powerful story. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
But it's funny. We just had a team meeting before I jumped onto this podcast, and similar to my career in the private security company industry, very decentralized, frontline leader empowerment. I'm doing the same thing. I've got my main focus is a company called Vita Living, does affordable living across Canada, and now getting into the US. And so our model is based on our building ambassadors, frontline leaders. And I was just because, for me, the ruthless consistency of saying how important it is that we service them like customers. They run the company. if we don't support them, they don't get support, they don't do the job, and the customer is unhappy, and nobody here has a job then. And so because there is this competing, whoa, Ron, that's soft stuff. That's soft stuff. That's not why you hired me. I do this function and I need to be focused. And so sometimes there's pushback on, wow, that's, I find the tension internally of saying, well, I know what my job is, I have to deliver, but now you're pulling me towards this thing that isn't 2 + 2 is 4,
Right. Until we get to a point where we live in a totally automated world, and we hope that doesn't come where it's everything's automated, we're relying on human beings. And I can tell you, one of the things I've learned very clearly over the years is, you hire employees, but human beings show up to work, which means we have to deal with the emotional side as well as the rational. Right. And people's psychology. And sometimes, to your point, people say, well, we shouldn't deal with the emotional. We need to deal with the rational. My response is dealing with the emotional is rational, because it's rational to recognize that we have, these two sides of us. There's the human side and there's the technical side. Right. And you can't deal with one without the other. And, there's been a lot of evidence, and we see this in a lot of businesses, unless you deal with, do customers feel good about your company? Do employees feel good about their work environment? We have to make sure we're tapping into those things.
Yeah, but there is this consistency thing. Like even when I said my message today, I said, I haven't been as consistent as I need to be with that message. It's a consistency problem for me, Right. And I told a story in the private security business, it was command and control hierarchy. If you're at the top, then you told people what to do and when to do it and why to do it. Sometimes you didn't even say why. Very command and control. And I was just telling a story to our team. I said, look, I know I don't need to say this today to our team, but in the past, because that was so anchored in the industry, what I would tell new managers is, Michael, welcome to the company, blah, blah, blah. One thing that's very important is, if I catch you treating me any differently than any of the full part-time security guards in this company, then there's no conversation. Just put your keys in the desk and the door's over there. And I used to be that ruthless with that. I'm not like that today, but I reminded our team that was needed because the industry, we don't need that today, but I certainly had to reinforce the message. And I think I have to do a better job being consistent with the message, because sometimes it's burning in my head. In my head, that's the vision, the mission. Yes, we do it when we talk about the company and hiring and onboarding and blah, blah, but you just need to keep pounding that message, eh?
Absolutely. Because, one of the principles I talk about in the book is what you do as a leader is not as important as what your people experience. The mistake we often make is it's clear to us. We understand, right? We've thought through the options, the pros and cons were clear to us. We assume it makes perfect sense to them. Well, it doesn't. So we have to keep repeating and reinforcing the message. It has to make sense to them because they're the ones doing the real work.
Right.
They're implementing the change. They're, providing the service, right? We have to make sure it makes sense through the eyes of our people. So as leaders, we shouldn't be self-centered. We have to recognize that what we do isn't as important as what our people experience. That's what we're trying to create.
Yeah, I love that. Michael, what else that we haven't talked about? We've been down a few lanes, some great conversation. What else that we haven't talked about that you think would be important for our listeners today?
Well, one of the things that always comes to mind with culture, and I know this is a passion of yours, Ron, is you may have heard the term culture eats strategy for breakfast.
All the time, believe it.
Right, all the time, right? Right. And so I'm going to give you a bit of a contra review here because I don't believe that.
Oh, we're up for a debate. Hold on. Whoa.
Right. Okay. We're at the gloves are off. We're ready to
going. Okay, go.
Here's why. If you have a great culture, but you don't have performance, you've got a country club. If you've got great performance, but bad culture, you've got a sweatshop. But if you have culture and performance, you've got a real, kick butt organization. So in my world, I believe in the triad: strategy, culture, execution. You need all three. All are necessary. I don't say one is more important than the other. It's like saying, what do you need? What's more important, sales or operations? Well, you need both sales and operations, right? In most businesses. So I really believe that all three of them are critical. So I'm kind of contra to that culture eats strategy for breakfast.
I was ready for a fight, but I think I say it differently, but we're saying the same thing. So I can't, I'm putting my gloves, I'm taking them off, Michael. I was ready for a I love to scrap too. I was ready. So I believe that you have to be strategic about your culture. So they're kind of, and I believe that performance needs to be embedded in your culture. So I think we're saying the same thing.
Yeah. So strategy and culture and execution, because at the end of the day, again, you can have a great culture, you can have a great strategy. Are we executing? So it's really that triad. And that's what I really instill in the companies that I consult with. We have to make sure all three of those are aligned. We are focused on those. And if collectively we do that and instill that in our people, we will be a winning organization.
Well, we're still saying the same thing, because I say that you don't have a good culture if you can't execute.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. So it's not, to me, the final piece is if you can't execute, come on, it's words on the wall now if you can't execute. So to me, you don't score points in my book if you can't execute.
Right. Exactly.
We're aligned, my friend. No scrapping today.
Okay, we're good. Okay. We're on the same side of the battlefield.
Yeah. Michael, look, thanks for joining us today. It's been a lovely conversation with a fellow Canadian. And are you Canadian, by the way?
I am. Yeah. Born and raised in Vancouver. So. I mean, yes. I've lived in Atlanta and Denver and different places, but yeah, born and raised in Canada.
Okay. And you've got a home in Denver, Vancouver. Correct?
Exactly. Yeah. First of all. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Well, look, Michael, it's been a pleasure. I'm actually at page 7 in your book, so I'm going to keep moving through. I'm more excited to read it now. And I think this has also been eye-opening for me, as I need to be even more consistent with my messaging. So thank you.
Excellent. Real pleasure. Hey, thanks for having me, Ron.
Thanks, Michael.
For more information about Michael, please go to www.makingstrategyhappen.com or connect with him on LinkedIn. For more information about the Scaling Culture podcast or our upcoming masterclass or second book, Scaling Culture, go to connollyowens.com. And if you're enjoying the Scaling Culture podcast, please subscribe and share with your network. We'll be back next week with another incredible guest.